I could feel his breath, steady, unsure, just inches from mine. The late autumn air outside did nothing to cool the fire between us inside the dimly lit guest room. His eyes searched mine, not with hunger, but with confusion, restraint, conflict. My heart thudded in my chest so loudly I was sure it echoed through the whole house. We weren't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not while my husband was sleeping just 20 feet away. And yet, we stood frozen, two silhouettes suspended in something we didn't know how to name. You should go, I whispered. I know, he said. But neither of us moved. For a long, agonizing second, the silence between us spoke louder than anything ever could. His hand didn't touch me. I didn't lean forward. But we both knew how close we were to crossing the line we'd been dancing around for weeks. Then a door slammed somewhere in the house. Everything shattered. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? It started on Thanksgiving. The kind of day Norman Rockwell would have painted if he lived in suburban Iowa and wasn't afraid of silence. My husband had spent the morning buried in spreadsheets on his laptop at the far end of the table, periodically sighing loud enough for everyone to know he was very busy. His son had come home from college with one of his friends in tow, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with warm brown eyes and a relaxed grin that made everyone around him sit up straighter. I was doing what I always did, cooking, setting the table, smiling too much to hide how exhausted I was from smiling. The house was clean, the pumpkin pie was cooling, and the Macy's parade played softly in the background. But inside, it felt like I was watching the world from underwater. They arrived around noon. My stepson hugged me briefly, then disappeared upstairs to drop his bags. His friend stayed behind in the hallway, politely waiting for permission to enter as if the house were a museum. He introduced himself with a handshake that was somehow both firm and kind. Over the next few hours, I caught him looking at me in ways that didn't feel inappropriate, just aware. Attentive. Like I wasn't invisible. We all sat for dinner, my husband mostly on his phone, and I made awkward conversation to fill the spaces he didn't bother to. Everything tastes amazing, the friend said as he took another bite of stuffing. This cranberry sauce is like something from a food magazine. I smiled. It's canned. He laughed. Then you made canned taste like something it's not. That's a skill. Later, as we cleaned up, he helped me in the kitchen while the others sprawled across the living room watching football. I didn't ask him to stay. He just did. You look exhausted, he said, scrubbing a plate with more care than anyone needed to. It's been a long year, I replied. Then I added, without really meaning to, my shoulders are killing me. You should get that looked at, he said. I laughed softly. I don't think you can see a doctor for loneliness. The words left my mouth before I realized what they meant. He paused, looked up, met my eyes. The air tightened around us, and just like that, I found myself stepping back. He didn't move toward me. He didn't need to. The room had already changed. The next day, my husband left early for a flight. Business in New York, he'd said. Gone for 2 nights, back Sunday. I barely looked up from the sink when he told me. Just nodded. And just like that, I was alone in the house, with a guest. Around noon, I found myself on the back patio, wiping down the dusty outdoor chairs. The air was crisp but not cold. He came outside with 2 mugs of coffee and handed me one. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the suburban world buzzing softly around us, distant leaf blowers, dogs barking, the muted hum of tires on pavement. You ever get bored out here? He asked. Every day. He took a sip of coffee. Why stay? Because leaving would mean admitting something broke. He didn't ask what. He didn't have to. That afternoon, we found ourselves in the garage, sorting through old Christmas decorations. My husband had asked me to do it weeks ago, but I never had the energy. The friend offered to help. Said he liked organizing chaos. As we worked, I told him stories about the ornaments, some cracked, some handmade by a child who hadn't been a child in years. I found myself laughing more than I expected. He made everything seem lighter, like nothing had to be so serious. When I told him I used to paint, his eyes lit up. "Why'd you stop?" "I got married," I said, too quickly. "Marriage kills art?" "No. Just time." By dinner, we were joking again. Eating leftover turkey sandwiches at the kitchen island, trading sarcastic commentary about cheesy Christmas movies. For a few moments, it felt like I was back in my 20s. Not in reality, but in my skin. Then, sometime around 9, I found myself saying, "My shoulders still hurt." He looked up from his cup of tea. "I could, if it's not weird, I used to work at a wellness clinic. Sports massage, mostly. I still do it part-time." I hesitated. "I don't want to make things uncomfortable. It's just a massage." "Nothing weird," he said, his tone honest, not flirtatious. "You can sit on a chair. Shirt on. Promise." 15 minutes later, I was sitting backwards on the dining chair, hands folded under my chin, while he worked in silence behind me. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the house settling. His hands were precise, professional, distant. But something inside me felt like it was uncoiling for the first time in years. I didn't realize how much tension I'd been carrying until it started to fade. "You're really good at this," I said quietly. "Most people carry pain in their shoulders. It's where we hold what we can't say." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The clock read 10:41 when he stopped. I stood slowly, not turning around. Something in the room had changed again, and this time we both knew it. "I should go to bed," I said. "Yeah," he nodded. "Me too." But we didn't move. And then, just as the silence began to stretch too long, the front door opened. Footsteps. A suitcase rolling across the floor. My husband's voice, muttering something about a cancelled flight. I turned sharply. He was there, standing in the entryway, coat still on. I was frozen mid-step between the kitchen and the hallway. The friend stood behind me, caught between exit and explanation. No one spoke. The moment collapsed inward. And just like that, everything changed. He dropped his suitcase at the foot of the stairs and stood there, blinking as if still processing what he was seeing. I don't know how long we held each other's gaze, my husband and I, long enough to register the confusion turning into suspicion. The guest room door behind me was still open. The hallway smelled faintly of peppermint lotion. "I thought your flight was tomorrow," I said, my voice barely audible over the hum in my ears. "It got cancelled." He looked past me, toward the dining room. The guest's shadow was cast long across the carpet. The silence was 1,000 pounds. Then, without a word, my husband turned and walked toward the kitchen, the suitcase still sitting where he'd left it. No questions. No confrontation. Just retreat. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed door, replaying every expression on his face. The guest had disappeared into the guest room without another word, though I had caught the quick glance he gave me as he passed, wide-eyed, unsure, almost like guilt, but not quite. We both knew nothing had happened. But nothing had a shape, and it was big enough to break something. By morning, I could feel the weight of avoidance in the walls. My husband had left early again, this time taking his golf bag. That meant he wasn't planning to be home for hours. I found the guest in the kitchen, pouring coffee into one of the mugs we only used when we had people over. He didn't look at me at first. Just said, "Morning," and offered the pot like this was a normal Saturday. I took it and poured myself half a cup, not because I wanted it, but because standing still felt unbearable. "You okay?" he asked finally. "No." We stood in silence. I looked at the steam rising from the mug, wishing it could just disappear into the ceiling and take me with it. "I can leave," he said. "You don't have to." But even I didn't believe that. We went through the motions of breakfast, but I couldn't taste a thing. I could feel the question sitting in the room with us: what now? After the plates were rinsed and stacked, I found myself outside again. The patio furniture still hadn't been wiped clean completely. The task I had started the day before now seemed like a lifeline. I needed my hands to be busy. I needed my mind to be somewhere else. He followed me out 5 minutes later, dragging a plastic bin filled with tools from the garage. "I figured I'd fix the hinge on the shed door," he said. "It's crooked." He didn't wait for approval. Just knelt down and started unscrewing the old, rusted bolt like it was the only thing in the world that made sense. I watched him work, and for a few minutes, I forgot everything. "Why'd you come with him?" I asked suddenly. He kept working. He invited me. I didn't want to be alone on Thanksgiving. That's not what I meant. He paused, sat back on his heels, and wiped his hands on his jeans. "I wasn't expecting this." Neither was I. He looked at me then, really looked. "Then stop letting it happen." I didn't answer. The rest of the day unraveled in fragments. My husband returned in the late afternoon, sunburned and silent. He nodded at me once and disappeared upstairs. I spent most of the evening pretending to read a book I couldn't even focus on. The guest lingered around the edges, never quite leaving, never quite staying. After dinner, when the dishwasher hummed in the background and my husband turned on the TV in the living room, the guest and I ended up in the garage again, this time under the excuse of reorganizing the storage bins. I don't know who suggested it. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe the silence between us made the decision. The air smelled like old cardboard and motor oil. He lifted a box labeled Smaz 2004 and nearly dropped it when the bottom gave way. "Careful," I said, laughing before I could stop myself. He crouched, gathering up hand-painted ornaments. "You made these?" "With my stepson, back when he still thought glue was magic." He placed them gently back into the box. "He's lucky, you know." I didn't know what to say. The space between us felt thinner than ever. I turned to reach for another box, and he stepped closer. Close enough that the scent of his detergent caught me off guard, clean, unfamiliar. I felt him stop, right behind me, the way you do when someone's about to say something they probably shouldn't. I turned to face him. We kissed. It lasted less than a breath, maybe. But it broke something that wouldn't go back. He stepped back, eyes wide. "I'm sorry." But I wasn't. And that scared me more than anything. I didn't say a word. Just grabbed the nearest bin and pushed past him, heading back into the house. My hands were shaking. Not from nerves. From how not nervous I was. It should have felt wrong. It didn't. That night, I cooked dinner like nothing had happened. My husband said he wasn't hungry. I placed a plate on the counter anyway. The guest ate in silence, thanked me, and disappeared upstairs. By the time the dishwasher beeped its completion, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the blinking green light like it held answers. I heard a door open upstairs. Footsteps crept down the hallway. But instead of the guest, it was my husband who entered the room. He didn't look tired. He looked clear. Too clear. I saw you, he said simply. My mouth went dry. Saw what? In the garage. Earlier. I came back for my sunglasses. Through the window. My hands curled against the edge of the table. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just stood there, then walked to the fridge and poured himself a glass of water. Then he turned to me, lifted the glass, and said, "Don't worry. I won't say anything to him. He's just a kid. Doesn't know better." I waited for the rest of the sentence. "But you," he added quietly. "You knew." He left the room. I didn't move for 10 minutes. Maybe more. I sat there, feeling the walls close in around me, trying to make sense of what just happened. Then I realized. He wasn't angry. He was done. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. My husband's words kept replaying in my head, every syllable heavier than the last. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He didn't accuse. He just stated the truth, calmly, like reading the final line of a book he already knew the ending to. By morning, I found him in the kitchen dressed for work, pouring coffee into a travel mug like it was any other weekday. He didn't look up as I entered. His silence was louder than any confrontation. "I'll be late tonight," he said without turning around. "Okay." He picked up his keys and left. No goodbye. I stood there, frozen, listening to the engine start and fade into the distance. Then came the sound of another door, quieter, softer, the guest stepping out of the guest room. He had heard it too. His eyes asked questions he didn't dare say aloud. I gave him nothing back. No expression. No explanation. Just walked past him and into the laundry room. I spent the next hour folding things that didn't need folding, reorganizing drawers that had been fine for years. The sound of the washing machine helped block out everything else. By noon, the silence in the house had mutated into something unbearable. He knocked gently on the laundry room doorframe. "I'm heading out," he said. "Where?" "Just out. I thought maybe I should give you space." I nodded. Probably smart. He waited, maybe hoping for something, permission, absolution, direction. I gave none. He left without another word. I stayed home, pretending to clean while watching the clock. I told myself it was just habit. That I wasn't waiting. That time didn't feel different now. But it did. When he returned hours later, I heard the crunch of gravel before the door even opened. My heart jumped, which annoyed me more than anything. I was still in the same clothes, sitting on the back patio with a half-finished mug of tea beside me, cold. He stepped outside and stood a few feet away, not sitting, just watching the trees like they might tell him what to do. "I went downtown," he said. "Walked around the lake. Got a sandwich." I nodded. I didn't ask for details. "Does he know?" he asked finally. "My husband?" He shook his head. "No." "Your stepson?" "No." We sat in silence. He finally sank into the chair beside mine, exhaling like the act of sitting cost him something. The sun dipped lower, painting the edge of the patio gold. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, and wind rustled the leaves. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I stared at the trees. "No. I regret what it changed." He turned to look at me. "What did it change?" "Everything." A long pause followed. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was in confession. "You know this can't happen again, right?" he said. I almost laughed. "You think we're still in control of it?" His face tightened. We have to be. I nodded, mostly to myself. Later that evening, we found ourselves in the car. It wasn't planned. I had asked if he wanted to go pick up something for dinner, mostly because I couldn't face another meal in that kitchen. He said yes too quickly, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to escape the house. We drove without a destination. Small-town streets blurred past as dusk settled. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, but he turned it down after a few minutes. Said it made it harder to think. We ended up by the lake. The same lake he'd walked around earlier. The same one we'd visited as a family 2 summers ago when everything still felt whole. He parked and cut the engine. We didn't speak for a while. The water was still, reflecting the faint outline of trees and orange clouds overhead. I don't know what I'm doing, he said finally. Neither do I. I feel like I should leave. Maybe you should. I don't want to. I looked at him. He looked like a man who didn't want to ruin anything but had already stepped on the glass. I knew the feeling. I don't want you to either, I admitted. And then we kissed. When we drove home, the silence between us was no longer heavy, it was charged. The house greeted us in shadows. My husband hadn't returned yet. Or maybe he had, and left again. I didn't check. We went to our separate rooms without speaking. The next morning, I stood by the mailbox in a coat I hadn't worn in years, holding a stack of envelopes I didn't care about. I just needed an excuse to be outside. To breathe. He joined me seconds later, jacket unzipped, coffee in hand. We didn't speak. Then he said, I should leave tomorrow. I've stayed too long. I didn't answer. I'll talk to him, he added. Your stepson. I'll tell him I need to go back early for work. That's probably a good idea. The day passed in fragments. I went to the grocery store. He stayed behind. When I returned, the guest room door was closed. My husband came home at midnight. I was still awake. Sitting on the floor of our bedroom, sorting through old boxes of photos I hadn't looked at in years. He walked in, saw the mess, and said nothing. Just stepped over them and opened the closet. I'll be in the den, he said. That was it. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of bacon and eggs. I walked into the kitchen and found the guest cooking, pan sizzling, sleeves rolled up. He looked up, surprised to see me awake so early. Thought I'd make breakfast. One last thank you. I nodded. Sat down at the island. You know, he said as he plated the food, I never meant to complicate anything. You didn't, I said. Life was already complicated. You just moved the furniture around. He smiled faintly. We ate quietly. After breakfast, he packed. By noon, he was at the front door with a duffel bag over his shoulder. My stepson was supposed to drive him to the train station after lunch. I watched from the window as he placed the bag in the back seat. My husband came downstairs just as I was walking back toward the kitchen. He looked at me, then at the half-eaten breakfast still on the table. You cooking for him now? I didn't respond. He walked to the window, watched the car pull out of the driveway, then turned back to me. You're going to see him again. It wasn't a question. And he was right. Because the real twist wasn't that I had kissed him. The real twist was that I didn't feel like hiding it anymore. By the time I closed the front door, the sound of the car fading down the street, I stood there longer than necessary, holding the handle, as if it anchored me to something I wasn't ready to let go of. The house behind me felt foreign again. Quiet in a suffocating way. Upstairs, my husband's suitcase was already zipped. I've got Atlanta tomorrow, he said when I passed the doorway. You remember? I did. He'd mentioned it in passing a week ago, something about a reunion or board meeting. I never kept track anymore. He stood by the closet, checking flight details on his phone. "You're leaving early?" I asked. He nodded. Red eye. "I'll be out before sunrise." I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. That night, we didn't speak much. We sat in the same room, watched the same television, breathed the same air, and said almost nothing. At one point, I realized we hadn't touched in over a month. Not even a hand on a shoulder. The morning came quietly. I heard the garage door lift, the tires roll out, the rumble fade into nothing. The house was mine again. For a few minutes, I just stood in the kitchen staring at the toaster. Then I opened the windows, let the cold air flood in, and started cleaning furiously. I wiped every surface like it owed me an apology. By noon, I had emptied half the garage and reorganized every shelf in the pantry. I wasn't thinking. I was avoiding. He texted me around 3. "Still in town. Thinking of stopping by. That okay?" I didn't reply. I just left the front door unlocked. He arrived with a grocery bag in one hand and a six-pack in the other. Said something about making dinner since it was his last night before heading west. I didn't ask what he meant by west. I didn't ask where or for how long. We cooked in silence. The kitchen smelled like butter and rosemary. I handed him a knife. He chopped garlic. We moved around each other without instruction, like we'd done this before. "I shouldn't be here," he said finally. "I didn't ask you to come." "I know." He set the knife down, exhaled through his nose, and turned toward me. "But I wanted to." Later, we sat on the floor in front of the fireplace with plates balanced on our knees, eating too fast, not because we were hungry, but because it kept our mouths full. I kept expecting him to say something meaningful. He didn't. We played a record from the old shelf near the window. Some dusty jazz album that belonged to my husband once upon a time. The kind of music that filled the silence without calling attention to it. Then it was late. The fire had turned to embers. The plates were empty. The room was dark except for the flickering orange light. I stood. "I should go up," I said. He nodded but didn't move. I turned to go, but stopped halfway to the stairs. "I'm not tired." Neither was he. He followed me upstairs. We spent night together. The next morning came with sharp sunlight and a buzzing phone. I reached for it with one arm still tangled in the sheets. The screen flashed with a reminder, dentist appointment, 9:30. I sat up. The bed beside me was empty. His things were gone. No note. No sound. Just absence. I pulled on a sweatshirt and padded downstairs. The kitchen was clean. Cleaner than I'd left it. No sign of life. But the front door was unlocked again. I waited. An hour passed. Then another. Just before noon, I heard the rumble of an engine and peeked through the blinds. Not him. My son's car. I hadn't expected him for another week. He was home early from college, probably a ride fell through, or plans changed, or something else I didn't think to ask. He burst through the front door like he owned the place, calling out as he always did. "Mom? You here?" I stepped into view. His eyes lit up. "Hey." Surprise. He dropped his duffel bag by the stairs, looking around like something felt off. "Is he here?" he asked. "Who?" "You know who." I froze. "No." He left. "Did something happen?" "No," I said. Too quickly. He squinted. "You okay?" I'm fine. He nodded but didn't believe me. That evening, I found myself driving. No destination. Just movement. The town blurred past. I passed a movie theater, a gas station, a group of teenagers loitering outside a diner that used to be the place we took my stepson after soccer games. I kept driving until the streets turned into countryside. Somewhere near the highway, I pulled off into a scenic overlook, parked the car, and stared at the horizon. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. He hadn't said goodbye. When I returned home, the house was buzzing again. My son had invited people over. There were shoes by the door, laughter from the basement, music vibrating faintly through the floorboards. I climbed the stairs quietly, slipping past the noise. Then, in the hallway, I froze. His voice. Low, familiar, unmistakable. I turned the corner slowly. There he was. Standing in my kitchen again. Holding a backpack, hair still wet like he'd just showered, smiling like nothing had happened. I forgot my charger, he said. My son stood beside him, opening the fridge, completely unaware of the stillness between us. I told him I could swing by and grab it, he added casually, glancing sideways at me. I forced a nod. Right. My son looked back and forth between us. You guys good? We're fine, I lied. Then, from behind him, my son pulled out 2 beers. I'm gonna show him the new setup in the garage, he said. He tossed one of the beers to him, and they both disappeared outside, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I stood frozen in the kitchen, heart hammering again. Because in that moment, the real twist hit me like a train. He wasn't here for me. He was here for my son. I stood in the hallway, gripping the edge of the wall like it could keep me upright. Their voices drifted from the garage, casual and warm, layered with laughter. There was no tension in the way they talked to each other. None of the weight I carried in my chest existed between them. I walked back into the kitchen, but the silence there was louder. I poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. My hand trembled just enough to make the ice clink against the rim. That sound somehow made everything real. He had come back. Without warning. Without explanation. And now he was in the garage with my son like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't. I stepped outside. The evening air was sharp, the kind that bites your skin but clears your head. I followed the light and low hum of conversation to the open garage. They stood side by side at the workbench, bent over a tangled mess of wires and speakers. The old stereo system we'd nearly thrown out last year. You almost got it, my son said. It's just the input cable, he replied, turning a dial. Yours was half fried. I swapped it for one of mine. They didn't notice me at first. Or if they did, they didn't let it show. I leaned against the frame of the door. How long are you staying? I asked, my voice flat. They both turned. He answered first. Just a couple days. I'm flying out Wednesday. I nodded, though the answer felt too rehearsed. Like he'd practiced it before walking back into this house. Thought I'd catch up with him before the semester gets busy, he added, jerking his thumb toward my son. Right, I said. Well, let me know if you need anything. I didn't wait for a response. I went back inside. That night, the 3 of us sat around the dinner table. Chicken and rice. No eye contact. My son carried the conversation, stories from college, professors he hated, new gym routines. He asked for advice, and the guest gave it like he'd never been anywhere else. The 2 of them slipped into their rhythm easily. Laughing, joking, teasing. It was too easy. Afterward, I cleared the plates while they moved to the living room. The sound of a basketball game floated through the air, mixed with the occasional shout or curse. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like replacement. Like I had been cut from a picture and someone had already filled the space. At midnight, the house settled. My son had gone to bed. I stood in the kitchen again, pretending to wipe down a clean counter, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. He walked in slowly, careful not to make noise. "Why are you here?" I asked before he could speak. "I told you." "For him." "And me?" He looked at me like I'd said something naive. "That night," he started. "Don't," I said. He stepped closer. "It mattered to me. But not enough to stay." He hesitated. "It scared me. What we did. What it meant." "Did it mean anything?" "It did. That's the problem." We stood in silence. Then he said, "I shouldn't have come back." "But you did." He nodded once. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you." We didn't touch. We didn't even move. But the tension between us was unbearable. It filled the entire kitchen, dense and invisible. "I'm not going to be the secret," I said. "Not anymore." His face shifted. Like I'd taken something from him he didn't know he'd offered. "I never asked you to be," he said. "You didn't have to." He left the kitchen. I didn't follow. The next morning, he was gone again. I found a note in the guest room that said he'd be back later. He went to grab coffee with a friend in town. My son had already left for the gym. The house was empty. I stood in the middle of the guest room, staring at the sheets I had changed not that long ago, and felt like a stranger in my own life. When he returned that afternoon, he acted like nothing had happened. We moved around each other like planets in an orbit neither of us could break. Later that evening, I found my husband's suitcase in the garage. I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't hidden, but it also hadn't been there yesterday. It was sitting near the door, half unzipped, with one of his jackets folded on top. I didn't remember him saying he'd come back. I closed the door quietly and went inside. That night, after my son went upstairs, I sat in the dark living room with a blanket over my lap, watching a movie I wasn't really watching. I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of the front door opening. I glanced at the clock. Just past midnight. Footsteps followed. And then I saw him. My husband. Standing in the hallway. Coat still on. Shoes still wet. Behind him, two figures entered, my son and the guest. They hadn't seen him. They were laughing about something, holding take-out bags, mid-sentence. The moment all three of them locked eyes, the room turned silent. My husband looked at them. Then at me. He didn't say a word. He just walked past all of us, into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. No one moved. And then he turned around, looked straight at the guest, and said calmly, "So how long's this been going on?" My son's head snapped toward me, eyes wide. And in that instant, everything shattered. The silence that followed his question felt eternal. My son's mouth parted slightly, his brows slowly pulling into a frown as the realization began to bloom. The guest stood frozen in place, one hand still holding the takeout bag, his expression shifting from casual confusion to cold horror. My husband didn't flinch. He just stared, waiting for anyone, to say something first. No one did. He turned back to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap like he hadn't just detonated the air around us, and took a long drink. Then he looked at me. Calm. Composed. And utterly unreachable. I'll ask one more time, he said, setting the bottle down. How long? My voice didn't come. My lungs refused to fill. My brain scrambled for the right combination of words and came up with nothing. I wasn't even sure who he was really asking. Then, without turning his head, my husband said, "You might want to answer before he does." The guest's voice cracked through the tension like dry wood. It wasn't, he stopped himself. It wasn't supposed to happen. That was all it took. My son's chair scraped against the floor. He stepped back like someone had just thrown a punch. His eyes moved between us wildly, like he couldn't decide who to yell at first. Or whether he should just leave the room entirely. But he didn't leave. He stared at me. "You," he said, like the word itself betrayed him. Still, I didn't speak. Then he turned to the guest, jaw tight. "And you? You slept with my..." "No," the guest cut in sharply. "We didn't." "Not like that." "Not like that," my son repeated. "What does that even mean?" I stepped forward. "Please don't do this here." My son laughed bitterly. "Where? The backyard? Should we take it outside like a barbecue confession?" The guest set the takeout on the counter, slowly, like any sudden movement might break the room further. Then he looked to me, just once, before walking toward the front door. "I'm sorry," he said. He left. No one followed. I looked at my husband. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't even blinking. He was just standing still, like a man who'd known for days but wanted to see if he was right. "You could have said something," he murmured. "You weren't here," I finally said. That was the only truth I had left. He nodded once, not in agreement but acknowledgement. Then he walked out too. My son didn't say a word. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, his chest rising and falling fast, his hand clenching around nothing. I reached out. He stepped back. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said. "But it did," he replied. Then he went upstairs and closed the door. The next morning, the house was soundless. No footsteps, no kitchen noise, no front door swinging open. Just a stillness that felt earned. I sat alone with cold coffee, watching the shadows move across the floor. Around 10, I heard a suitcase roll across hardwood. I looked up. My husband passed through the hallway, not stopping, not even glancing in my direction. He walked out the front door and didn't close it all the way. I followed him outside. He was loading the trunk. "You're leaving?" I asked. He didn't stop. "You left first." "I never wanted this." "Then what did you want?" I didn't answer. He shut the trunk and faced me fully for the first time. "You know what's worse than betrayal? How quiet it is." The car pulled away, and I stood in the driveway watching him go, wondering when exactly we had stopped recognizing each other. That night, I found my son in the garage. He was sitting on the floor, back against the dryer, staring at nothing. A half-empty can of soda sat next to him. He didn't look up when I entered. "I never saw it," he said. "There wasn't anything to see," I replied. "Not until it was too late." "He trusted you. Both of you." "I know. I don't think I can stay here." I nodded. "You don't have to." He stood slowly. "I'm going back to campus. Early." "When?" "In an hour." He didn't wait for me to respond. He went inside, and I heard his footsteps disappear up the stairs. I sat down in the spot he'd just left and stayed there until the cold started to numb my arms. Then the doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. It rang again. When I opened it, I expected to see him as the guest. But it was my husband. He looked different. Not angry. Not hollow. He walked in without asking. "I came back for answers," he said. "I don't have any." "Yes, you do." We stood in the living room, the silence growing larger between us. Finally, he said, "You can't undo what's done. But you can decide what it meant." "I don't know what it meant." He nodded. "Then we've both got a problem." He turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back. "I'm not coming home until you do." Then he was gone again. I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled everything I'd been holding. And just when I thought the day was over, my son walked down the stairs, bag over his shoulder, eyes fixed ahead. He stepped outside without a word. And waiting for him by the curb, standing beside the car, holding the same old backpack, was him. The guest. They hugged. My son said something. He laughed. And then, without looking at the house, they both got in. And drove away together. 7. Based on Chapter 7 of the scenario. I didn't move from the window for a long time. The street was already empty, their car gone around the corner. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, faint and tired. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked and settled into silence. The house was hollow. Everything in it felt paused, abandoned mid-breath. I spent the rest of the day pacing. From the kitchen to the hallway, from the living room to the garage. I straightened picture frames that weren't crooked, refolded throws that hadn't been touched, wiped fingerprints off a counter no one had touched in days. I kept hoping that by the time I circled the house again, someone would be back. They never were. That night I fell asleep on the couch in clothes I hadn't meant to wear to bed. I woke before the sun, disoriented by the flickering light of the TV and the aching tightness in my neck. For a few seconds, I thought I'd dreamed the last 24 hours. Then the silence reminded me it had all been real. I stood and walked to the kitchen. The guest mug, the one he'd always chosen, still sat by the sink. I stared at it for a long time, then moved it to the back of the cabinet. As if hiding it would undo anything. By midday, I heard the first sound of life since they left, a knock at the door. I opened it without thinking, heart jumping too quickly. It was a neighbor, older, holding a box of cookies she said she had baked too many of. She didn't ask questions. She didn't stay long. Just offered a soft smile and walked away. I stood with the box in my hands until I realized I didn't want them. I set them on the table and walked away. The hours blurred again. By afternoon I was in the garage, sitting on the edge of the step, elbows on my knees, when I heard the car. It wasn't his. It was my husband's. He pulled into the driveway and didn't get out for a while. I stayed where I was, watching through the small window in the garage door. Eventually, he stepped out, suitcase still in the back seat. He walked up the steps without ringing the bell, using his key like nothing had changed. He walked in. Saw me. Closed the door quietly behind him. Neither of us spoke. He placed his phone on the counter, jacket on the hook, as if he'd only been out for an hour. Finally, he said, "I'm staying in the den. I'll leave in the morning." I nodded. Okay. He opened the fridge, took a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. I just needed to know what kind of home I was coming back to. And? I asked. I still don't know. That was all. He walked into the other room, closed the door, and didn't come back out. I didn't sleep again. I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaks, the quiet sigh of the heat kicking on, the ticking of the hallway clock. In the morning, he was gone again. The note on the table was short. I'll reach out when I figure out what I need. I stared at it, unsure whether to keep it or burn it. In the end, I left it exactly where it was. By noon, I packed a small bag. Not because I had somewhere to go, but because I couldn't stay still anymore. I got in the car and drove, past the strip mall, past the park, out toward the edges of town. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe we used to visit years ago, back when the weekends still felt like something to look forward to. I sat at a corner table with a lukewarm coffee, watching couples pass by outside the window. The sky had turned overcast, and the wind carried a chill that hinted at the coming winter. I thought of holidays. Of how none of this could be reset in time. Of how strange it felt to grieve something you weren't even sure you wanted anymore. Around 3, I drove back. The house felt even emptier than before, like someone had vacuumed the air out while I was gone. I went into my stepson's room and opened the closet. Half his things were missing. I hadn't noticed it earlier. A few hangers remained and a box of books near the corner, but the energy of the space was gone. I went to the guest room next. It still smelled like him. I opened the drawer. There was a folded receipt from a gas station 3 towns over, time-stamped the night he'd left. Beside it, under a book, was a photo, old, from a summer barbecue. All 4 of us smiling like none of this had ever been possible. We looked happy. Normal. And then I heard it. The front door. Voices. Multiple. I stepped out of the hallway and saw my son. And behind him, the guest. They walked in together, casual, like nothing had happened. I froze. My son dropped his backpack by the wall. We're just picking up the rest of my stuff. They moved through the house with intention, like they'd done it a dozen times before. I watched them from the doorway. They didn't rush. They moved together. Packed together. Spoke in quiet tones, coordinated, natural. When they came downstairs again, I was still there. My son looked at me, then glanced at him. Then back to me. "He's coming with me," he said. I couldn't form words. I couldn't move. They both walked to the door. And just before he stepped out, the guest turned to look at me. Not with guilt. Not with regret. Just clarity. And for the first time, I realized. He hadn't been torn between 2 people. He had already chosen. And it wasn't me. The door closed behind them with a quiet, final click. The sound didn't echo, it sank. My hand was still on the wall, fingers digging into the paint as if holding myself upright required external force. I hadn't said a word. Not when they entered. Not when they packed. Not when he looked at me like I was a distant memory. I walked into the living room on autopilot, past the couch, past the fireplace, and stopped in front of the window. I watched their car pull away, the tail lights blinking against the late afternoon sky. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stood there, trying to process how something that had felt so tangled, so impossible to escape, could leave so swiftly. The house was colder now. Not in temperature, something deeper. Every corner of it felt emptied out, not just of people but of context. Without them, the furniture lost its meaning. The mugs, the blankets, the old family photos, everything now belonged to a version of the house that no longer existed. I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I picked up the box of cookies the neighbor had dropped off and started eating one. They were dry. Too sweet. I kept chewing anyway, like it might keep my jaw from locking. At some point, I got up and showered. I scrubbed harder than usual, like I could wash off the weeks behind me, like if I did it just right, I could return to some version of myself that hadn't yet crossed the line. By evening, the silence became unbearable. So I left. I didn't take a coat, didn't lock the door. I just got in the car and drove without knowing where I was going. The streets blurred past, gray and muted, the light slipping out of the sky like it was ashamed of what it had witnessed. I passed the high school, the church, the corner market with the broken neon sign that had been flickering for years. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. I ended up at the park. It was nearly empty. A few kids in the far field, their laughter faint and distant, a couple walking their dog in slow, lazy circles. I sat on a bench near the basketball court and just breathed. The cold air bit at my cheeks and filled my lungs like a reminder that I was still here. Still breathing. Still standing. I stayed there until the sun disappeared completely, and the street lamps buzzed to life. When I returned home, the house looked untouched. As if time hadn't moved while I was away. I walked through each room like I was checking for something missing, but nothing was. That almost made it worse. I went upstairs and opened the closet. I packed. Not a lot. Just enough. A bag. A coat. A few pieces of clothing that didn't remind me of anything. Then I stopped in front of the bathroom mirror. My reflection looked back at me, older than I remembered. But calm. Almost calm. I stepped outside again, bag in hand, and stood on the porch. Then I froze. There was a car parked at the curb. Not his. Not theirs. My husband. He was sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, engine off. For a moment, I thought about going back inside, pretending I hadn't seen him. Then he got out. He didn't bring anything with him. No suitcase. No expression on his face that I could read. He just walked toward me and stopped a few feet away. I forgot something, he said. I didn't answer. He looked past me toward the house, then back at me. I came back for it. What? You. The wind shifted. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pleading. He was just standing there like a man who had walked every step of the last few weeks and ended up back where he started, but no longer the same. You saw everything, I said. I did. You heard everything. I did. And you still came back. I didn't say I forgave it, he said. I just said I wasn't done. I didn't move. I didn't drop the bag. Then he looked down at it. You going somewhere? I was. Still planning to? I don't know. He nodded slowly. Can I come in? I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, neither of us touching the mugs in front of us. The silence was different now. Not heavy. Not cold. Just present. He looked at me. I don't want to ask what happened. I already know. I waited. But I will ask one thing, he said. Are you still in it? In what? Whatever you were feeling for him. I thought about it. No, I said. He breathed in. Do you miss him? Yes. But you wouldn't go after him? I shook my head. Not anymore. He looked down at the table, then back at me. Then let's stop burning down the rest of the house. He stood. I'll be back in the morning, he said. You decide by then. And then he walked out, just like that. I stood by the table, unsure if I should sit, run after him, or lock the door behind him. But I didn't get the chance. Because just as the door closed, it opened again. Not him. Not my son. But the guest. Holding the bag I had packed. The one I had left outside by accident. He looked surprised to see the house lit. He looked even more surprised to see me standing there, alone. "I thought you were gone," he said. "I was about to be." He held out the bag. I took it. Then, from the shadows behind him, another figure stepped forward. My son. No expression. Just a single question in his eyes. He looked from me to him, then past both of us, and said, calmly, "Are we all living here now?" And in that moment, I realized nothing had ended. Not yet.